Welcome, everybody, to the first Lions offseason Lone Wolves podcast. I'm John Macaroon. Christian's here as well. I guess we got to do it. We got to take the opportunity now to kind of start to turn the page from the Lions 2024 season and kind of start to talk about 2025. It's a little bit unusual, Christian, because this week is the Super Bowl. Everybody's going to be paying attention to the Eagles and Chiefs storylines. There'll be some news that, we'll typically break regarding, some Lions players or administrators that talk or former Lions that kind of talk about the previous season. Clearly, the news that everybody's kind of still digesting is the overhaul of the coaching staff, kind of how it all shakes out, what happened in 2024. But Christian, my goodness, the NFL calendar, as we've talked about, it just flips so fast. In 3 weeks, I'll be at the NFL Combine talking to Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, looking at some of the positions that are going to be relevant for the Detroit Lions. And so clearly, I think to start, this football team needs to level up in 2025. I think clearly, right now, as constructed, they're not as good as the Chiefs. They're not as good as the Eagles. And you could even make the argument right now, they're not as good as the Washington Commanders. It's a football team that now is in flux. They're in a really unique spot, Christian. It's unusual to be talking about sustained success for the Lions. And I think clearly you recognize that as long as Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes are going to work together, that's one of the strengths of the organization is that, hey, you got leadership at the top that should set the tone for this football team moving forward. So I would expect success. But right now, the Lions are still on the climb for the ultimate success. They still have not won a Super Bowl. And that's kind of how I've always focused and analyzed the team. How close are they to winning a Super Bowl? And I think the injuries definitely, this year put an outlier out there in regards to why didn't the team win? Did they have enough talent? It would have been interesting to see because many can reasonably argue if Aiden Hutchinson doesn't get hurt, you lose a defensive player of the year candidate. If Amik Robertson continues to emerge, he stays healthy. If Carlton Davis is out there, you could be, making a strong case that the Lions and Eagles would have had one heck of an NFC championship game, and the Lions would have given potentially the Chiefs all that they could handle. But when you sit back and you survey the landscape now with the mindset of, all right, how this football team needs to improve, in my opinion, the offseason priorities needs to be the trenches. Clearly. And I'll ask you directly which side of the ball needs more. Because you can make the argument the offensive line is getting a little bit older. They were inconsistent. They had their strengths. Both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery had solid seasons. But at the same token, the pass blocking got iffy at times, especially in the big games against the Bills and the Commanders. You recognize, hey, there's some improvements that could be made to an aging offensive line. Many people are looking at the play of Graham Glasgow, Taylor Decker. We'll look at that later on. Lions on SI and future articles when we review the season as to kind of the future of some of these guys as well when we look at contract and salary cap. But you look at the offensive line, and clearly that's the engine of the offense, making sure that Jared Goff's okay and that running back group continues to thrive. But to me, the most important side of the football that you got to retool and probably upgrade clearly is the defensive line. I think that Josh Pascal, Levi Onwuzurike, Zadarius Smith are good football players. But along with DJ Reader, I just feel like you can upgrade with younger talent and free agency as well. So I understand that there is a good group of Senior Bowl players that's out there. You saw the draft. Now, as we start to put that together, we'll explore which area should be addressed in the draft and which area should be addressed in free agency. But right now, Christian, what line, which defensive line or offensive line, what should be the Detroit Lions offseason priority, in your opinion?
Yeah, no, it's tough to evaluate that because both sides of the ball have like foundational pieces, whether it's the offensive line with Ragnow, Decker, and Sewell kind of as the bookends of that offensive line, or Aiden Hutchinson and Aleem McNeil on the defensive line. So I think in terms of anything drastic, I think both lines are in a good spot, but I think that you could really use some supplementary pieces on both sides, and in particular on defense. I think offensively, when you look at Graham Glasgow took a little bit of a step back this year. So, maybe he just signed a 3-year contract extension, so I wouldn't expect the Lions to move on from Graham Glasgow. But and plus, you've got Christian Mahogany. Like, if Kevin Zeitler ultimately does not return in 2025, there seems to be some confidence in Christian Mahogany or Coyote Awasika to be able to step up and fill that void. So there's some depth there. On the defensive line, however, you start talking about Zadarius Smith and maybe the implications of cutting ties with him a year early, just based on salary cap and things of that nature. And then Levi Onwuzurike is a free agent. So in my opinion, I think that they need to look around for whether it's a nose tackle that can step in. I think we talked about it last week, but Broderick Martin, we're still waiting to see the returns on Broderick Martin as potentially the nose tackle of the future. Probably wouldn't hurt to stock up there a little bit. Or do you go for a little bit of a three technique option who could be a rotational guy? I know they have Makai Wingo and they may choose to bring back Onwuzurike, but at the same time, you got to start thinking these young guys, right? Well, Lee McNeil is a long-term player. They locked him up to an extension. Aiden Hutchinson, long-term player, locked up to an extension. So now you need to find these rotational depth type players. And I still wouldn't hate to see him take a swing on an edge rusher, man. Like, that to me is the area of biggest need. I know they've got a few different things where they could use a depth piece or a supplementary piece, but I think, man, they should be looking to take a swing on an edge rusher, maybe in the first round if they hold on to that pick. So you take a look at some of the members of this draft class at that position, and it's hard not to get excited about what a couple of those guys would look like in a Lions uniform. So I'll ask you, defensive line, do you go young guy, draft prospect, or do you think that's an area where they would benefit more from adding a veteran? And really all around, what areas, what positions do you think need to be addressed in the draft, and what positions need to be addressed in free agency?
Yeah, no, and looking at priorities, I think clearly the draft looks deep in terms of edge rushers, especially at the top. I think that a lot of the edge rushers that left the Senior Bowl kind of left an indelible mark, had good practices, and then decided to leave. I like what you could get at number 28. I think that you could get potentially a Mike Green or a Stewart that kind of stood out as well. Even maybe when you look at Josiah Stewart, I think that Vito did a great scouting report at
Yeah.
Lions on SI, somebody that maybe you can get in later, maybe in the second round at number 60. So I think that in that first two picks, I do think that potentially it's strong that the Lions are going to go offensive line, defensive line, or reverse, or maybe even twice along the offensive line. But to me, I think the priority should be defensive line in the draft. And then maybe you can supplement the offensive line in free agency if you find somebody that's, in their mid 20s that's looking for maybe on the last year of their deal that you can potentially move up, or somebody that's already on the roster in regards to, maybe Manu gets a little bit more of a step. You hope that Colby Sorsdal takes some of the, takes a slight to being on the inactive list for a large chunk of the year. You hope to kind of get some development from some of the guys that you drafted that are in the roster. You still have Kingsley Igakwan as well, that's on the roster that many people respect as well. Muti, I think, as well, is a player that people are looking at as well. That could also be a contributor or continue to develop. So there's still some options, but in my opinion, I think you go in the draft and you find defensive linemen and you are able to continue to build. And I think the offensive line is pretty much stable, but you can tinker and maybe add a player or two in free agency. So speaking of the roster, because we got to decide. I do think that one is not going to return. I think it's going to be either Josh Pascal or Levi Onwuzurike is going to depart because I think you are going to add a couple talented players. Levi's a free agent. I think that in terms of a contract, I'm uncomfortable potentially investing 15 million based on the production that he had. I thought he had a good season. I thought he deserves credit for working hard and being out there, being somebody that is working hard and overcoming the doubts that people had. But in terms of the value, if another team is going to come in and offer 15 million plus, your contract prediction was, I believe, 15 million per season, 3 years, 45 million, I believe, in regards to what could be offered by the Lions. I would say that those funds potentially could be used to, begin the process of securing Aiden Hutchinson to a long-term deal. I would probably look at free agency as well. At cornerback is a spot at free agency I would look to, and maybe some players on offense that you can find in the draft. So basically, I say the defensive line could be looked at in the draft, and then maybe defensive back will be looked at in free agency, in my opinion. But if you could, part ways with one, if you have to just keep one between Josh Pascal and Levi Onwuzurike, does it make sense just based on how the Lions view the players and their leadership that maybe Josh Pascal still has an upper hand in regards to roster security?
Oh yeah, I think Pascal's the guy if you got to pick one of the two. He's still got a year left on his rookie deal. He has found ways to be productive. I really like the way he defends against the run, kind of as that bigger defensive end. He's not going to be a guy that's going to do a ton in terms of bending the edge and getting after the quarterback. He's not going to give you, 50, 60 pressures a year, but I think when he's in the lineup, he's super reliable. In terms of long term, like, is he going to be a guy that gets an extension this offseason? I don't know. Maybe the Lions, if they feel really good about where he's at, maybe they give him an extension to kind of get ahead of it. Of what they think if he could be a breakout guy this coming year, maybe they extend him now and kind of get ahead of it and capitalize on his market. But I think in terms of Onwuzurike, it's really tricky when you evaluate where he could be in terms of the defensive line market. And I kind of wrote about it, but he is a guy who has that kind of high end pass rush potential. It's not production right now; it's potential. And so when you think about what his next contract could look like, there's going to be a team, I think, and it could be the New York Jets with Aaron Glenn, who's worked closely with Onwuzurike for the last 4 years, who could see that potential and maybe try to take a swing on him and offer him a higher end contract in hopes of him really finding it and breaking out. But when you look at the structure of this Lions defensive line, and you think about Aiden Hutchinson, and you think about Aleem McNeil and DJ Reader, and Zadarius Smith, if he's still around, Pascal, and then maybe Mekhi Wingo somewhere in there, Broderick Martin. You start to think about where Onwuzurike could slot in terms of depth. And so for me, I wasn't comfortable in my prediction giving him quite 15 million. I thought 3 years, 42 million would be like the max in terms of paying him based on production, potential, and what he means to the organization, because the sentiment about Onwuzurike during training camp and during the season was all really positive. And so it leads me to believe that the Lions really like him and the player that he can be and the player that he really was when you think about his overall body work being healthy for 2024. But I think he would be a guy that the Lions could feel comfortable parting ways with and allowing him to go to another team where maybe he might get a little bit more money and a little bit of a bigger role, and then try to find his replacement in the draft or try to develop Mekhi Wingo into that type of player. So I think if you're asking me one out of two, him or Josh Pascal, I think I got to go with Pascal for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how the Lions prioritize. But later on in the podcast, we'll talk about what we saw from the Senior Bowl. But it seems like the Stewarts kind of
Yeah.
emerged. Josiah and Shamar kind of put their name and stamped that they're going to potentially have the opportunity to do a lot of things. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I think it's clear that revamping in the trenches will be a priority for the Lions. And I do think that we're close to accurate that I think the draft will be a spot where they can potentially look for both. And many people are even starting to think that Lions could go offensive line, that they could replenish both sides in the draft as well. But I do think that, in regards to who has the potential to play sooner, I think that it's going to be tougher to crack a veteran laden offensive line. Maybe there's one spot available. It might be at left guard, and there's going to be four guys that are potentially going to be in line to take that spot. So it's something where a defensive lineman, if they come in and showcase to Calvin Shepard and Casey Rogers that they can rush the passer and have consistent sack totals, then hey, but also credit to the Lions. They did get more interior pass rush. It didn't translate necessarily into sacks, but they doubled their interior pass rush totals in regards to kind of statistical numbers in regards to getting more pressures. So good on the Lions. I thought that they acclimated well to Terrell Williams. It's just, in the end, the bottom line is sacks are also a great play because they, take a team and put them behind the sticks, which is always an advantage for a defense. So pressures are great, but you can still get a pressure and then still give up an explosive play. In the end, the all-world quarterbacks can handle pressure. Jared Goff, in the face of pressure, can get the ball out quicker and do some things. So pressures are a great indicator, a starting point of how your defensive line is doing, but sacks are definitely an indicator of the conclusive play of, hey, when you pressure the quarterback, the end result is a sack typically is going to be negative yardage, putting a team at a disadvantage in terms of the sticks, and that typically does favor the defense in regards to kind of down and distance getting switched up in the favor of the defense. So it'll be interesting to see kind of as we start to get more information about the combine, who's going to show up there, the numbers that eventually show up, what kind of test numbers some of the draft prospects have. So stay tuned as at Lions on SI as we've started the process already of looking at free agents and some draft prospects that the Lions might be interested in. Some of the Senior Bowl players that stood out or maybe struggled that could fall maybe an advantage to the Lions based on the new revamped coaching staff, what they're going to be interested in. We'll probably have an opportunity, I hope, to speak to John Morton and Kelvin Shepherd at the combine. Hopefully, an opportunity to kind of get our early glimpse of what they like, what kind of players they're interested in, what their reactions are to joining the staff. But it's intriguing now because you know, the football team does, like we said, need to level up. They have to get better. They have to make some tough decisions because I do think that even if they were healthy, it might have been an uphill climb to be able to win the Super Bowl because it does take an overwhelming amount of luck. It takes a lot of execution, playing well at the right time, not having a setback like they did against the Commanders where they played their best brand of football, maybe keeping the noise to a minimum. But I do think that, the new coaching staff, which is interesting because at Sports Illustrated, Albert Breer did a brief nugget in his recent report before the Super Bowl, and he indicated, he was speculating, kind of wondering why would the Lions go with John Morton and Kelvin Shepherd when maybe there were some more experienced higher end coaches like a Dennis Allen or a Robert Saleh or a different offensive mind, maybe a Doug Peterson, somebody that has experience as a head coach. And I think that the nugget from Albert Breer was really intriguing and interesting, indicating that maybe Dan Campbell chose the two coordinators, not only based on their experience and familiarity, but also to kind of maybe guarantee that they could be around for at least the next 2 or 3 years. Because if John Morton has success this year, you figure he might get some interviews, but he may not be the hot name in the circle at 55 years old. He may have a chance to maybe at least last 2 years in the system. Kelvin Shepherd as well. There's a benefit in regards to comp picks later on down the road. But I do agree with Sports Illustrated in that, yeah, I think that the part of the decision, part of the reason why Morton and Shepard are in the position that they're in is I think it does kind of start to give the coaching staff some stability for the next couple seasons.
Yeah, I mean, look, anytime you lose two coordinators in the span of a week is really tough. And to think about the fact that maybe they could have some continuity over the next couple of years with Morton and Kelvin Shepherd, it is a good thing. Like Dan Campbell talked about in his end of season press conference, he wanted philosophy to be he wanted continuity with his philosophy. Say that 10 times fast. But he really has this scheme offensively in particular. He is an offensive guy. And schematically, he wants it to be a lot of the same things for Jared Goff. John Morton makes a ton of sense. He makes a ton of sense. So moving forward, I'm excited to see how the Lions can develop on this scheme that Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell formulated because you're going to have new wrinkles with Morton, but at the same time, you're going to have the same philosophy and ideas of Dan Campbell. So the two of them working together is going to be fascinating. I cannot wait to see the regular season opener and the differences and the similarities within the Lions offense. And then defensively, Kelvin Shepherd, like leadership-wise, he checks all the boxes. When you hear the players talk about him, like how they did during the season, you hear Dan Campbell talk about him, and the fact Dan Campbell kind of orchestrated that interview between Glenn and Kelvin Shepherd, where he wanted those two to work together, and it ended up being an awesome partnership. And now Kelvin Shepherd has the defense. So again, it's really tough to lose two coordinators in the same offseason in the span of a week. And if you're the Lions, you hope you got it right. And not only that, but you hope you got it right for multiple years.
Well, as we were talking, some information popped live here that maybe we can talk about right now. And it's very interesting. One of the premier edge rushers has put out there publicly, Myles Garrett wants out. And
Wow.
it's smart. I think that when you look at his position in the league, it's one of those deals where, he's somebody that doesn't want to go through a rebuild. You know that you're going through quarterbacks. The Browns are in a rebuild. It's one of those deals where it makes sense for all parties involved You got Zadarius Smith. Does it make sense, in your opinion, for the Lions to pursue Myles Garrett? Do you think it's reasonable, feasible for the Lions to make an offer, knowing that, well, you did an article potentially knowing what it would take to maybe move on from Zadarius Smith? Do you upgrade, or do you say, hey, goes back to our point earlier, draft or free agency? You take a swing at Myles Garrett, Christian?
Absolutely, 100%. I think it's got to be Myles Garrett. Like, if you think about what he could bring, you talk about win now with the Lions. It's all win now, in my opinion. Like, obviously, they want to be sustainable. And so you're going to have to give up some things, like, in particular, draft picks. You're going to have to give up the picks, and that's going to be the way it has to be. But I think anytime you have an opportunity to get a guy like Myles Garrett in there, and I'm going to have to take a second here and get the details as far as contract and things like that of where that or what that looks like. But Myles Garrett is an incredible impact player, and
You could say Aiden Hutchinson. Like, come on now. That would be incredible for the Lions. And, right now I'm feeling throw all caution to the wind. And, maybe as time goes by, maybe my mindset will change a little bit on that. But I think on the surface, this is a big potential move for the Lions. I think they've got to be right in the middle of it because, like I said, you're win now. You've got Aiden Hutchinson, who you're most likely going to sign to a huge contract extension. Why not go get one of the best of the best to pair with him and try and see if you can't win this thing the next year or 2 years? And I think that really you would become Super Bowl favorites, regardless of what happens with the Chiefs and if they three-peat. Like, you would become Super Bowl favorites if you get Myles Garrett.
Yeah, most people think that that's kind of the indicator of letting go of a lot of picks. And we've talked about that. Brad Holmes doesn't seem like he's going to do that. What do you think early thoughts are? What it would cost to get Myles Garrett? What do you think?
Oh, I mean, you're talking
Two?
multiple firsts.
Multiple first, huh?
Yeah, I think maybe two. I mean, you could even they. I mean, you heard Brad Holmes talk about it during his end of season press conference and how there were only 4 or 5 edge rushers that were realistically available. I mean, you're talking multiple firsts. You might even have to give up a player. Like, I don't know. I would have to really dive in to see. Obviously we've talked hypothetical trades like that, especially during the deadline last season. But yeah, oh gosh, I mean, it would be
Okay,
steep.
listen. We know specifically it might be two. Let's just say two firsts for Myles Garrett. You do it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think right now where you're at, especially with the disappointment of last season, you've nailed so many of these draft picks. Like, you've afforded yourself the opportunity to go after somebody like a Myles Garrett. I think you talk about the cap situation, and you've got 1 or 2 years before that cap is going to start to get heavy and you're going to start to feel it. And you still got all these guys you still have to pay. I think you go do it right now and you try to win this thing while you've got all these, like the Laportas of the world, the Gibbs, all them on rookie deals. You got to go after it, in my opinion. I think that now is the time.
Yeah, it's funny because last week it was best young core is going to be the chant for to replace Jared Goff. Man, it's hard not to. You know what I mean? Because, he's an established player. I just watched the 8 episodes of Hard Knocks. He's a monster. Like, the man gets to the football. You
Yeah.
think working with this football team. So, got to replace the chant. So, no more Jared Goff. No more best young core. It's F them picks.
Yeah.
F them picks.
Yeah.
F them picks. F them picks. Get Myles Garrett. Like, what's it gonna hurt? Like, you think
Right.
Aiden Hutchinson and Myles Garrett are gonna flop together? What's it gonna hurt? You raise the ticket prices on these people. Let them enjoy a defense that they can be proud of instead of all this wishy-washiness, instead of all this hope. Well, maybe Mekhi Wingo, maybe James Houston. I think the Lions fans deserve more than just a maybe. Aiden's there.
Yeah.
He needs a compliment. You didn't get Trey Hendrickson. You didn't get the top dog. Max Crosby is out of his mind, not requesting a trade. I have more respect for Myles Garrett than I do for Max Crosby for sticking it out there publicly. I want out. I want to win. And winning is important. That's what I wanted Stafford to do at some point, not request a trade, but to put out publicly the number one thing in my heart is to win and get
Yeah.
me a winner publicly and just do what you got to do. And, but I get it that, hey, you got to do what you got to do. Stafford eventually won, but not with the Lions. They don't grow on trees and they don't become available. So while Brad Holmes had to struggle and fight and scratch and claw for Zadarius Smith, make the call, get Myles Garrett. There should be no
100%.
pushback. Look, draft picks are maybes, and established stars don't just end up being there all the time. So it'll be something to talk about. You'll definitely, after we're done, I know, look at it right away and to
Yeah.
establish the pros and cons of, again, trading for Myles Garrett. We'll look at it and see what the pulse of the Lions fans are, but um, we'll see the opportunity. We'll see what it costs. We'll see what, when he puts his name out there, it puts it out for the Chiefs, all the big dogs that want a defensive line. They're going to come calling. So it's smart, I think that for all parties involved, kind of like a Stafford situation, I think the
Hmm.
Browns want to reset from everything that they've gone through and they want to be able to handle business. But we'll see as it plays out. We'll see. We'll give our detailed thoughts here later on Monday regarding Myles Garrett. But which coach that left do you think is going to hurt the Lions the most? Is it Terrell Williams? I think there's a chance because the defensive line, I do like what Rodgers brings to the table from all involved. I think that the coach that left, clearly Ben Johnson, John Morton is a nice replacement. Calvin Shepard is an Aaron Glenn, somebody that was mentored by a coach here. So there's
Hmm.
going to be some stability. I think Terrell Williams leaving with the caliber and the attachment that the players had, you saw Aiden Hutchinson quickly get up to, nearly double-digit sacks within a handful of games. I think finished with 7.5, a lot of pressures, and was a force. So it's going to be a tall task, in my opinion, to replace Terrell Williams. Which coach that left? I know Antoine Randall had a lot of impact with the receivers. That receiving
Hmm.
core was great. We haven't yet to see who's going to replace him. Odds-on favorite is Seth Ryan. Still no replacement for the tight ends coach. I do think that the tight ends, great blocking, but not to the degree in which you'd say, hey, Laporta didn't have his best year, and I think you could have got more out of him. So I think that the coach that left with the biggest impact that will potentially, you got to wait and see and explore how that looks moving forward. To see how Kesey Rogers handles the defensive line, which has constantly been in flux. I think that Coach Terrell Williams leaving for the Patriots is going to be a big hit for the Lions.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Antoine Randall in terms of assistant coaches who are gonna leave a huge impact. I mean, and the reason I say Antoine Randall is we've seen the kind of camera shots of him getting into Jamison Williams and really letting him have it for mistakes. But at the same time, you also see the clips of when Jamison Williams scores the long touchdown against the Bears. Antoine Randall is the first guy to greet him and celebrate with him. And I think that's the hallmark of a good coach, where he's tough on the standard with the player, and with Jameson Williams, the standard is the standard, and regardless of how good or talented you are, like, this is still our standard. But at the same time, you can see he genuinely cares about the players, and I think that's been a staple of everybody that's been on the Lions staff. But I think when you look at the impact Antoine Randall has had with Amon-Ra St. Brown now being a multiple-time first-team All-Pro, Jamison Williams finding his footing and becoming a 1,000-yard receiver for the first time in his career in his third NFL season. Tim Patrick had a pretty solid year as the wide receiver 3, stepped in, fit like a glove with what the Lions were trying to do. And then you go a little bit further down the depth chart with Khalifa Raymond, and what he's been able to contribute as a receiver, in addition to being one of the league's best punt returners. And I think Antoine Randall, not just as a coach, but as a person and an individual, you could see the relationship he had with the guys in his position room. And I think that regardless of X's and O's and schematics and what you can bring to the room from a drill perspective, that relationship you're able to formulate with your players while you're there is always tough to replicate. And now you've got a new coach. I mean, if it's Seth Ryan, he's already been in the building. But if you bring in an outside voice, he's got to take that time to gain the trust of his wide receiver room and things of that nature. So I do think that's going to be a tough loss for the Lions, and one that maybe a little bit overlooked. But also when you take into account the fact that he's going to Chicago to be Ben Johnson's assistant head coach, I think that also tells a little bit of the story as far as how he was valued within the Lions organization. So that's a tough one to lose for sure, as are all the guys in their own unique ways. And obviously another one I'll mention real quick is Tanner Engstrand. Losing him, he's considered one of the brighter young minds on the coaching staff, and he's headed to New York to be the offensive coordinator. And I think a fun little storyline that we're going to get throughout the next season is Terrell Williams runs the Patriots defense. Tanner Engstrand runs the Jets offense. So twice a year, 2 former Lions are going to be matching wits and going at it. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
What's the Lions' current salary cap situation as we had? It looks like still top 10 in numbers. I think just shy of 50 million. Now that's not including the players that will potentially get cut. You'll add some funds to it, but
Yep.
there's also going to be some numbers that get decreased when some extensions happen, maybe for JMO if it's long term, or Hutchinson or Kirby Joseph. So there's going to be some decrease in it. But right now, before, it seems like that whatever the Lions need to do for 25, the salary cap is in a decent spot. It's going to balloon in
Yeah.
26, but let's not worry about 26 right now. Let's worry about right now heading into free agency. What did you learn from just kind of researching a little bit about the salary cap for the Lions heading into free agency?
Yep. So according to Over the Cap, which has the base salary cap estimated at 272.5 million, the Lions currently have a touch over 46.5 million in cap space. And in terms of effective cap space, that number is 43 point roughly 9. It's 43.871, but roughly 43.9 million in effective cap space that they can use to bring in free agents and draft picks and other players of that nature. For the 2025 season, which is a pretty good spot to be in when you think about the fact that you could use a veteran corner, whether that's Carlton Davis. I know you mentioned it earlier in this podcast that corner is a position that would be best suited by bringing in a veteran player, whether that's re-signing Carlton Davis. I wrote about Paulson Adebo as a potential guy who could be a replacement at the cornerback position. I just think you've got to get older at that position. And I think having this amount of salary cap is perfect because it gives you a lot of different avenues to go down. I don't necessarily expect the Lions to pony up for a big name free agent and throw, north of 20 million at somebody. But at the same time, you've got the resources to do that if you see fit. And again, this is a good spot to be in for the Lions. And this salary cap and the cap space is all based on the estimation right now. The official cap number is normally released in late February. And I know when they released the number from last season, everybody was shocked because nobody thought the cap would increase by as much as it did. So roughly like an 18-ish, off the top of my head, $1 million increase is what's projected from 255.4, which is what it was last year. I wouldn't be necessarily, given last year as the precedent, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up a little bit more and the Lions have a little bit more spending room before, cap casualty cuts and things of that nature, which also evaluating that, not to get on a tangent too much, but evaluating that is tough just because the Lions don't really have anybody where you look at them and you go, yep, that's a guy they should cut. Like there's obvious benefits to cutting certain players, but they're productive guys. It's not like they've had somebody who's not living up to their contract. There's obviously some benefits to parting ways with a guy like Zadarius Smith based on the cap implications, but at the same time, Zadarius Smith can be a guy who comes back and gets you 8 to 10 sacks next year. So again, it's tough to kind of evaluate who the cap casualties could be, but at the same time, they've got the money. They're in a good spot heading into the offseason here.
Okay, yeah, I think that it's always an advantageous position to be able to have options where you can sign your own, you can pursue free agents that you want, you can pay players that are talented that are available now, like a Myles Garrett, and you have the opportunity to be flexible and have enough for a rainy day and to pay the draft picks, which I think the Lions have done for the first 4 years a great job of the cap, and I expect no less from Detroit's front office is to put the team in the best position to be able to have success now and in the future. Sustained success is great, but Super Bowl win is fantastic. I think that, the general managers in town love the word sustained success, where that's great, but most winners just win one Super Bowl, win a cup, win a Major League Baseball World Series. Sustained success is great, but I think that should be put behind going for it and having an opportunity when you sense it to time it right. Fans, I think, would respect that more than just getting there year after year after year after year. Eventually, you got to pay it off. You got to, as some would say, finish the story, as
Yeah.
a lot of people would understand that reference, to understand that you got to, finally bake the cake and let everybody enjoy it, not just let everybody window shop for year after year after year. Eventually, someone's going to need to make a purchase here and let the fans kind of get the payoff for the investment and the time and everything like that. So we'll see as it moves forward. Our last couple topics here for this episode, real interesting, intriguing episode of Lone Wolves as news broke regarding the potential future. It's interesting too, because the GM at the Senior Bowl of the Browns said he's not going to entertain any trade offers, but when a guy puts a letter and signs his name, it's going to be hard to bring him back.
Yeah.
So I think the price will be driven up. and that's just a posturing move by the Browns. They're going to get a lot for him, and hopefully, when there's an opportunity to look at what kind of picks that it's going to take, many people are looking at the Khalil Mack trade that took place as a
Yep.
comp. So we'll look at all that as we prepare, our official Lions on SI statement regarding going and be aggressive, go get Myles Garrett as it's out there. But some news was made at the Senior Bowl. A lot of good edge rushers, a lot of good interior line play, a lot of good offensive linemen making a case for themselves. I think the quarterbacks kind of maybe are a little bit down, not as much hype surrounding those that were, tossing the football, but a lot of hype regarding, a lot of the players in the trenches. Like we said, the Stewarts, Josiah Stewart and Shamar Stewart, definitely along with Mike Green, kind of acclimated pretty well. Who caught your attention? What did you learn from the Senior Bowl? I caught the practices. I read all the reviews, the highs, the lows. Definitely, it appeared to me that there's some edge players that you can get and some value too, as well, if you don't want to go early in the draft. But look, you go to the Blue Bloods. Oregon has great offensive linemen, and Ohio State, Texas, which was crazy because that was my review. That was the single reason why I went to, because I don't want to go to Ann Arbor personally. That's not my favorite place to sit in. I love the press box. The media there is nice. They're super cool. But I went to Michigan State and I get more joy going there. Just the joy, the love, the being an alum. You feel better.
Yeah.
But I went specifically, and people would say, "Why are you here?" People would see me and joke around, like, "Don't you ever take a day?" I said, I said, I want to see the offensive line of Oregon. I want to see the offensive line of Texas. I want to see the offensive line of Ohio State. When I went to, I think, the state game, and I seen the greatest play from a wide receiver that I seen in Spartan Stadium with Smith just going bam,
Yeah.
catching it one-handed. I had to take it on the chin. But I got to see these offensive linemen, and that was my notes, was like, these dudes look like monsters compared to the defensive line of Michigan and Michigan State. I was like, these are grown men. What are they putting in these lines? Texas rolled up like a professional team with 5 buses and motorcade, and Oregon and Ohio State. I definitely was impressed clearly with Mason Graham and Josiah Stewart at Michigan. But what stood out to me was the offensive line of Oregon and Ohio State. There's some blue bloods there. There's some talent there that the Lions may also be interested in. But who caught your attention at the Senior Bowl? What stood out to you? Who's a player or two that the Lions maybe should scoop up that caught your attention? Or maybe somebody under the radar as well?
Yeah, I think Mike Green really made a statement for himself. Like, the clip going around where he's just bullying offensive linemen. Like, that to me is what you're looking for. And I think when you take a deeper dive into Mike Green, you like what you see because he is athletic. He's I believe a converted wide receiver. He was recruited as a wide receiver at one point, and then just had a really awesome year for Marshall in 2024. And now, he's one of those guys, though, that I got to be completely honest. I think he's like the trendy name that's going to continue to skyrocket. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes out and crushes the combine. And then you're talking about a guy that the Lions might not be able to touch at 28. Like, he may be a top 15 guy when this is all said and done. And we've seen that before. Another guy that comes to mind from last year is Quinyon Mitchell, who was excellent at the Senior Bowl and ended up going to the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe, 22nd overall. But again, the Mike Green had an excellent week. I think on the offensive side, Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, that guy, somebody who just really popped out to me when I was reviewing. I love to dig in and try to find these small school guys, whether it's like Group of Five or FCS type schools, and just really get to learn about them. And Gray Zabel was one of them that, there's some versatility there. He's an excellent run blocker. He's a solid pass protection guy. There's some whispers that maybe he converts to an interior lineman, whether it's playing guard, whether it's playing tackle, whether he's playing center. Like, this is a guy that you would love to see the Lions pick up as another depth piece, just a mean dude who's not afraid to go in there and knock defensive linemen around. And then also shout out to TCU wide receiver Jack Besh. I mean, everything he's had to endure, the tragedy of losing his brother. He had a solid week and then caught the game-winning touchdown in the Senior Bowl. Just a really cool story. A guy you root for when you read about the things that he's had to go through recently with losing his brother. Just a tragic story, but for him to have that moment at the Senior Bowl is incredible. And that's a guy, like I said, that you want to root for. And that's a guy that I wouldn't be upset about the Lions scooping up maybe late day 2, early day 3 as well. Just a really cool story there with him.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see. The draft is here. People are definitely paying attention. So pay attention to some of the linemen. Pay attention to I know, Lions on SI as we do a lot of scouting reports. Definitely people are paying attention to a lot of what's going on. We've definitely highlighted some of the names as well. And as well, we started to look at free agency as some potential prospects are available that people are talking about. It's funny that you selected a player that's coming off of a broken femur. That's the first player that people are paying attention to. That people are like from the Saints, and the first reaction was always funny. People are like, "Why would we go for somebody with a broken femur?" And I'm like, Christian. But my next thought was, you know what? That's a Brad Holmes special. A little bit more
Oh,
affordable.
yeah.
Brad Holmes
Buy low.
special. So you have an opportunity to potentially go in the draft and free agency and find guys that maybe are out there. But I think Vito or Lions on SI did a great profile on Siobhan Ravel as well. The cornerback
Yep.
is
Yeah, that was
a
me.
player that people are also paying attention to. Quickly, who did you target as the early free agent buzz for the Detroit Lions? Because I think it's going to be interesting. Early free agent buzz. Who caught your attention and why?
Yeah, when I take a look at this free agent class, really to me, you think about all the different areas where the Lions should be kind of looking around. And to me, corner is huge. And I mentioned it earlier, but I think you need to go get a free agent corner. And here's why. Carlton Davis obviously is on an expiring contract. And the Lions, I think if they choose to bring him back, like that's your marquee move. Because Carlton Davis isn't going to come back on a 1 year extension. It's going to be 2, 3, 4 years maybe, and you're talking about in the neighborhood of between 13 and 16 million a year probably. So to me, it's not necessarily which specific free agent, but it's about do the Lions elect to fill their needs by bringing back and retaining their own guys like a Davis, like a Derek Barnes, like a Levi Onwuzurike? Do they allocate those assets in free agency to keeping their depth core together? Or do they look externally and you talk about a guy? That's when a guy like a Debo would come in from New Orleans because he's a corner who his market value is slated a little bit below Carlton Davis, and obviously that's due in part to the injury. But when you talk about that, yes, it was a broken femur, but it also kind of a freak thing. Like, is that something that's going to happen twice? I certainly hope not. But I think you're right. It's a Brad Holmes special, and it's you buy low on a guy who's coming off an injury, and if he's got to miss part of training camp, we've certainly seen that before with free agent guys that he's brought in. So to me, Adebo makes a ton of sense just with his style of play. He challenges receivers and he gets his hands on the ball. You're talking about a guy with 10 interceptions in his career over 4 seasons. And I think that as long as he can stay healthy or prove that he's getting healthy moving into 2025, I think that's certainly somebody the Lions should try to go after.
Okay, one last thought here. I could not stomach Christian the Pro Bowl. I tried.
Oh gosh.
I tried. I mean, everybody's sitting there going, listen, man, flag football doesn't do it for me. I don't care that Jared Goff won the offensive MVP. I tried to watch the practices, watch the competitions. I giggled when Brian Branch got hit in the nether regions there, but oh my God. I agree when people like Kirby Joseph said, I'm not going. I think players look for an excuse not to go. I don't want to be that guy to get off my lawn guy, but it did for me. I was still in kind of mourning for the Lions season, still recovering from all the coverage, being a reporter in depthly covering an NFL team. So
Mm-hmm.
I took in barely none of it, watched it, but it was like less than in the background. Understood that, okay, just the parameters, the basics of what's going on. Great. Congrats to Jared Goff. You get a little snippets of kind of some early reactions to John Morton, which we wrote about at Lions on
Mm-hmm.
SI. But, I'll be honest. My first thought was just hopefully none of the Lions get hurt. Hopefully
Yeah.
nobody goes there and does a lap or does a drill. I thought the quarterback toss was great. I liked the competition that Jared Goff won. I thought it was fun to get more time with a little bit of a trivia game. But other than that, other than Goff maybe winning the tossing competition, his accuracy was great. I like the 5 point difference. But to me, the Pro Bowl probably just needs to kind of wither away and move on. Flag football is ridiculous, not interesting, not intriguing. And I think that you just name it just like you do all pro. You don't have an all pro game. you just maybe just eliminate the game and expand on the competition where you have like, maybe older, this show was, predated you, but ABC used to run the Wide World of Sports, and they do the like a variety of competitions and things like that. I would expand upon that, maybe a card game, maybe some more interesting stuff, maybe a live podcast, some more updated digital type stuff that can be intriguing. A round table, have a first take type show with some of these athletes. Could you imagine a Jared Goff with, a member of the Packers doing their thing, or a member of the Vikings kind of going head to head? Or, hey, listen, I don't want to give the NFL ideas, but feel free to steal it. You don't have to credit me. Hey, live rewatch, Goff and the Vikings. Sit there and rewatch a game that the Lions beat the Vikings and go, hey, look what I did here to you guys. Or just a little bit of insight, or, just have some more intriguing, entertaining ideas than a flag football game. You can do so much.
Yeah.
Like, come on, producers, up your game in regards to some ideas. I didn't care about the Pro Bowl, barely watched it. Congrats to Goff. He was the MVP. What'd you think? Is this something that they should just keep doing, or maybe bring back? Listen, I don't want to bring back a game where there's no tackling. So any ideas that you have to spruce it up? But it was subpar and boring, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't really take in any of it. Like, I watched the skill showdown a little bit, because you had Lions in different events. But as for Sunday, I mean, I didn't really take it in too much. I saw the clips on social media, and I saw Goff won MVP. But it is like, to me, the Pro Bowl, you kind of take away the essence of football, which is the physicality, and you pull out that part of the game, and it's like, well, then it's not really what all these guys have spent all year doing. And I get why they did it. They don't want anybody to get hurt, and I understand it. But at that point, let's just not do it. Like, I love the skill showdown. I think is the best part of it, and I think that if you can continue finding ways to innovate that, and then it's fun. Then it has that kind of NBA All-Star Weekend feel. And the difference is like the NBA, they have the All-Star game, right? But it's not as contact, and they don't really play defense in the All-Star game. And everybody's got complaints about that too. So I don't know what the solution is necessarily. If it were me, it would be more about expanding on the skill showdown, and not necessarily doing the flag football thing. Like, I get you got to have some sort of game, but it just hasn't really. It really hasn't done it for me since they've made the change. And it is what it is. Like I said, I enjoyed the skill showdown. I didn't really have too much invested into the game itself. So moving forward, who knows how they do it? But I like some of those suggestions. I like the rewatch in particular. I do. I think that would be a neat little idea.
And also, too, as you were talking, it just hit me too. Just get them on the game. Goff against Gibbs in a Madden game. Just
on Madden,
around, live gaming, Twitch feed, something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more competitive, some more competitive nature, where you have some like you start off with a tournament and you start playing your own guys, or hey, each guy plays Gibbs and against Taylor Decker in Madden, or something quick or something fun that they can get on, or Team Halo, where hey, whoever gets the most attacks and wins and points, something as a group that you can compete in with several big screens that people can enjoy. A little bit more for the young people, a little bit more that's entertaining, gimmicky. But I just think that the game aspect, the football should not be played. It should just be a festival of football. Get a chance for 4 days, hang out, meet up, have some fun, compete a little bit, some entertainment, some content, and you keep it moving. But we'll see what happens as the Pro Bowl evolves. We'll see how the ratings look. But congrats to Goff. Offensive MVP, 3 touchdowns, 10 of 11. Congrats to Jared.
Hey, if you'd have told me that Jared Goff was offensive MVP, I thought you'd be talking about the Super Bowl by now. It's unfortunate that it's offensive MVP of the Pro Bowl. That's
my first thought. Do it when it counts.
Yep.
Not in some exhibition. Christian, great recap as always. This is a good start for us for the offseason. We'll check in probably once or twice a week. For sure Mondays, maybe Fridays as we get guests and kind of break it all down. But we're enjoying a little, off-season time. But a couple weeks, the Combine fires up. So make sure you stick with Lions on SI, videos, podcasts, analysis, insider news as we pick the brain of people that will message me on my favorite phones and gadgets. So it's a fun time, and it's a great opportunity to check in with the Lions still this offseason. Myles, Garrett, let's figure it out. We're going to get to work. And we'll have an opportunity to bring you everything in regards to the Detroit Lions on SI.